Welcome to Museum Moments. I'm your host, Rob Lauer. The Portsmouth Community Colored Library Museum is the city's newest museum, and recently it received national recognition. That recognition is the subject of this special January-February 2015 episode of Museum Moments. Welcome to Museum Moments. In the early 1940s, during a time of racial segregation, the Portsmouth Community Colored Library was founded to serve the needs of the city's African American citizens. Portsmouth librarian Bertha May Winborn Edwards was a driving force in the founding of and in the life of that library from 1945 until 1962. Recently, the late Miss Edwards won national recognition from the United for Libraries American Library Association, which declared her a national recognized literary landmark. Miss Edwards is the very first African American literary landmark to be named in Virginia. On December 17th, the ceremony was held at the Portsmouth Community Colored Library Museum to celebrate this honor, and our cameras were there.
As mayor of this historic port city, located in the heart of Hampton Roads, I extend a heartfelt greeting from the entire Portsmouth family. On behalf of the City of Portsmouth and the Portsmouth City Council, we welcome you here to Portsmouth Community Colored Library Museum Literary Landmark Plaque Dedication. Let's get that done. The United for Libraries American Library Association has recognized Bertha May Winborn Edwards of the Portsmouth Community Colored Library as a literary landmark. Another round of applause. This designation is in recognition of her literary works and her community involvement throughout the library and the library community and throughout the city of Portsmouth. As a Portsmouth native, Miss Edwards attended public school in Portsmouth and was a 1937 honor graduate of I.C. Norcom High School. She received a B.S. degree in 1942 from Hampton Institute, which is now Hampton University, with a double major in social studies and library science. And in May of 1945, she received the call to do what would become her life's work and passion. She was hired by the Portsmouth City Council to become the first public librarian for blacks in the city of Portsmouth, where she organized and established the Portsmouth Community Library. She worked in this position from the library's opening in December of 1945 to 1963, the year the mayor was born, while also serving as consultant in helping to open 3 other elementary school libraries. And in 1963, the year the mayor was born, when integration of libraries began in the city of Portsmouth, she became a reference librarian, retired in 1980 after 17 years and 35 total years of service to the Portsmouth Public Library System. Let's get at it. Ms. Edwards also compiled and authored several books, including a 2-volume History of Blacks in Portsmouth, 7 volumes of a pictorial history of blacks taken from the Lee F. Rogers collection, a history of black baseball in Portsmouth, and a biographical sketch of African American men in Portsmouth from 1974 to 1996. Today, I would like to join with the Portsmouth family in congratulating those involved with making this day possible. This national award, this is a national award that was bestowed upon us by some very special people. Can we please ask them to stand? all of the ones that worked in the background to make this day possible, and let's give them a hand. Now at this time, we're going to have a selection by the Brighton Elementary School Choir, and followed by them, we're going to have again, as Mayor Holly used to always talk about, a proper perspective. We're going to have two individuals to come up and give us, y'all can go ahead and line up if you like, go ahead and give us some personal account as well as a historical account of this fabulous, phenomenal woman. First, we'll have up Joel Wimborne. He's a family member. He's the nephew great nephew of Miss Edwards. And then following him is a lady that absolutely needs no introduction, who's probably one of the premier historians. And you know, rarely when you're reading a lot of African American history, some things come across and you read it and you say, that doesn't sound right. But when I see Dr. Cassandra Newby's name, by it or anywhere near it, you can best believe it has been researched and it has been documented and it has been put in its proper perspective. So Dr. Newby, it's good to have you here. Now with that, if our choir from Brighton Elementary would. All right, at this time, Mr. Joel Wimborne, great nephew of Miss Edwards.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wright, friends of the library, African American Historical Society. On behalf of the entire Wimborne family, we want to thank the American Library Association and United for Libraries for selecting Aunt May as a literary landmark. We especially want to thank Ms. Linda Holmes, Ms. Mae Breckenridge, Glenn Tinsley, the African American Historical Society of Portsmouth, the Friends of Portsmouth Library, the Portsmouth Community Library Museum, and the Portsmouth Public Library for nominating Aunt May for this great honor. Thanks to all of you for coming to celebrate our aunt and everyone that has worked so hard to make her small piece of history a lasting memory in the form of the literary landmark that many after us will be able to witness and enjoy, knowing someone fought for them before they could fight for themselves. It's truly a blessing. Finally, let me say a personal thank you for allowing me to share a few more memories about Bertha Mae Wimborne Edwards. She was quite a lady, and she was my great aunt. Thank you.
All right, now, at this time, Dr. Cassandra Alexandra Newby from Norfolk State University. Doc? Give her a hand.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Oh, I have to use my teacher voice today. Okay. You know, when Mae Breckenridge and I decided that it was so important to begin the process of preserving the history of African Americans in Portsmouth through a short book, the very first person we consulted was Mrs. Bertha Edwards. Why? Let me just give you an idea. I just brought the book because I wanted you all to see that just about every image in this book was because of her, because of what she preserved, because of her determination to make sure that this history, these lives, not only mattered, but would be remembered. And so we just went into her room and we said, "Do you know this person?" And she said, "Oh, yes." And they were married in 1935, and their children, and she began to list the children. And she said, "Now, right now, the oldest child, who is," and she would list the age, I have no idea how she did that, "is married to so-and-so, and they have 5 children." And then she proceeded to tell me what organizations they all belonged to, what schools they went to, when they graduated from those schools. By the time she finished with me, my mind not only was completely blown, I was not only humbled, but I knew I was in the presence of one of the most extraordinary human beings that had ever lived. That was Mrs. Edwards. But what was most interesting is she was the most humble, energetic, ageless individual that I've ever had the pleasure and honor to know and to be involved in and to be involved with. You all know from Mayor Kitty Wright's summary of her life, you know that she was the first and longest serving librarian at this important landmark. I want you to know that it's because of people like Mrs. Edwards and the African American Historical Society of Portsmouth and the mayor and the city council and countless other people that we're not talking about the library that used to exist and holding up a picture of it. Instead, you can walk over there and see that library, unlike so many other landmarks that were important to African Americans and the community. And so those of you who are young, I know for you history may be boring, but it won't be in a few years, because you will start remembering things that happened 5 or even 10 years ago. And you will realize how important that history is, how important those memories are. And that is what Mrs. Edwards gave to us. She gave to us important memories. She gave to us an important legacy. She would pull open these books that Mayor Wright talked about that were important to the research that went into this book. And I'm challenging at least one of you who are over there from the Brighton Elementary School, to become a historian and to make sure that this book becomes 5 times the size, your book becomes 5 times the size this one is, as you talk about African American history in this incredible city. Even though for so long the city was only 2 square miles. 2 square miles. 2. Not 10, not 20, 2 square miles. The people in the city knew each other, worked together, struggled together, fought sometimes together, sometimes fought each other. But the city has survived, and it has expanded, and it has become what we see today. But too often, when you forget what people have done, you lose sight of your legacy and, most importantly, your destiny. I think Mrs. Edwards knew what her destiny was when she entered Hampton Institute and decided she was going to major in two things. Two of the most important things that people dismiss as unimportant today, unfortunately. And that was library science. It's library science that opens the door to access to all the information that when you pull out your smartphone and you Google something, that whole access system is because of library science. It is because of library science that you can cross-reference. And Mrs. Edwards not only knew that, but I think she had a sense of how important understanding library science was and understanding history. And she majored in social studies, which is a spin-off, it's an education spin-off of history, because she wanted people to know their history, and she wanted to be able to teach it. And so what did she do when she became a librarian? She set up a system whereby when people came into the library, they didn't just ask, can I read this book? Can I read that book? But she made sure that African American children would read the newspapers that were talking in a positive way about Black children, Black adults, Black communities, churches, institutions, and so forth. She had a list of subscriptions to Black newspapers in that library. She made sure that Jet Magazine, Ebony, as well as many other magazines were brought to that library so young children could actually access it. But she didn't just think about young children. She thought about adults as well. Because Portsmouth, like a lot of cities and counties throughout the South, especially during segregation, something fortunately you all don't know about. I know about it, but you don't. And so your hearts and minds are free from that horrific system that was designed to make African Americans feel as if they were not fully American citizens. But it's during that time that so many African Americans didn't have an opportunity to go to school. They didn't have an opportunity to learn how to read and write. And so she provided a service in that library to make sure that even adults knew how to read and write. But she didn't stop there. Because during segregation, and unfortunately we still see and hear people today who have the same attitude, they didn't want Black people to vote. And there were all kinds of devices put into place to ensure that African Americans could not be registered to vote. Not only did you have to pay to vote, it was called a poll tax, but you had a thing called a ballot that you had to fill out. And this wasn't a voting ballot, this was a registration ballot. Now, one of the most interesting things about the ballot was they would show you what needed to be completed, 1 through 20. And then they would take that back and give you a blank piece of paper and say, fill it out. And if you did not fill it out exactly, you were not registered to vote. And so in that library, she taught people how to memorize the blank registration form. And they learned how to fill out that form and started getting registered to vote. Now, this is not something that someone asked her to do. This is something that she felt committed to doing. What an incredible woman. And so we celebrate her life, her legacy today with the dedication of this plaque, but I'm hopeful that we do more than that. We not only remember what she did, but we carry on her legacy. And so I challenge everyone here to make sure that her memory never dies. The things that she did will never be forgotten, and that everyone will value the collection that she put into place so that we would never, ever forget our legacy, because that legacy is important to our destiny. And our destiny is not just for the 21st century, but it is beyond, because it is collectively that material was preserved. I think about the director, the former director of the library, Dean Burgess, who was important in also helping to make sure that all of those materials that she collected were preserved in the Portsmouth Public Library. I've seen so many pieces of history that relate to African American discarded, thrown away. I remember getting a call a few years ago by a contractor who said that the children of this important minister over in Norfolk, who was involved in civil rights, had letters from Martin Luther King and from many other civil rights leaders, had documents, pictures of family members from the late 19th century, and his daughters did not value that history and had thrown it all away. And this person called me and said, "Do you want some of what I've been able to recover?" Absolutely. And now it's in Norfolk State University's archival collection, so that future generations researching that family at least have some information that's been preserved. So I think it's time we stop throwing away what is priceless. Because what is priceless is our legacy. What is priceless is our history. And what is priceless is our destiny. Thank you all for coming to this dedication, and thank you for listening to my words of encouragement about how important Bertha Edwards' legacy is and will continue to be for not only this community, but for the entire Hampton Roads area. Thank you.
Following the ceremony, I spoke to some of the participants about their memories of Bertha Mae Winborn Edwards and also their thoughts on the mission of the Portsmouth Community Colored Library Museum.
My name is Joel Winborn.
I'm Cassandra Newby-Alexander, professor of history at Norfolk State.
My name is Sharon Waters. I'm the Vice President of Organizational Development for STOP Inc.
My name is Sue Burton. I'm retired library director. I worked with Bertha Edwards from 1970 to 1980.
I have known Ms. Bertha all of my life, and she and my mother, and this is a true story, were best friends since the second grade, since they were 7 years old, and they were both born to be librarians because my mother was a librarian, Alabama State, and Ms. Bertha, of course, as you can see, was the librarian for the community Portsmouth Library.
When I first started working, Bertha was pretty much my mentor and showed me the way around the reference desk and introduced me to African American history, which I knew nothing of. Of course, she also told me about the history of Portsmouth. I was not a Portsmouth native, and when she retired, she kept on working. So when Cassandra Newby-Alexander was talking about some of those things that she published, you notice that they were after 1980. She still came down to the library to do research, spent time on the microfilm reader, asked us questions and to help her find things, and never gave up her desire to be a historian and to make sure that all of those people were not forgotten.
I believe that history is so important because when she actually started the Portsmouth Community Library, when it was in 1945, this was only about maybe 80 years after we could even African Americans could even learn to read or could read legally. So that's why it was so very important.
I would say for most of my life, history has been a part of my life. I've had grandparents and parents who've informed me about the importance of history and the importance of place, the power of place. And I've learned over the years that when buildings, when institutions are no longer there or functioning as they were, that preserving that building is critical, because people are tactile. They want to touch, they want to have a sense of the space and see the importance of place.
I love the idea of a museum. I love the idea that there's going to be somewhere that people can come and see later on. It's not just here's a story about it. We can actually go, this is where it was, this is what it looked like before. You actually can see the building, you can see the size of it, and it brings so much of a realization, or not sure how to even put it, just makes it, I guess, real.
It's one thing to theoretically talk about something. It's another to actually visit that location, which is why people make pilgrimages to Jerusalem or to Mecca or to Bethlehem or to Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia, because being in that place where people did great and wonderful and awesome things is critical to our understanding, and it gives us a sense of not only reverence for what people did and sacrificed, but it also gives us a sense of destiny. And so preserving the Portsmouth Colored Community Library is critical, because there's so many institutions and buildings that are no longer there for African Americans. And to have a place that was such an important part, it was the heartbeat of the community.
The beauty about this museum, library museum, we call it, is because now all of the history is able to be preserved for generations that shall come after us. And hopefully there will be someone there that can explain also to them the importance, the significance of remembering who you are. Because in order for you to know who you are now, you must remember who you were then.
The Portsmouth Community Colored Library hosts events and programs throughout the entire year. To learn more about them or to visit the museum itself, log on to www.portsvaafricanamericanheritage.com or call 757-393-8983, extension 20. That's it for our show today. I'm Rob Lauer. Join me next time for another episode of Museum Moments.